Good afternoon, people. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. This is the Climate Restoration Documentary press conference. And welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us. We have a nice audience today. This session will focus on the documentary about climate and ecosystem restoration. There will be other press conferences, including some on the 6th, the 8th, the 9th of November, focusing on climate restoration science, public policy, and youth activism. And there's been one yesterday on methane removal by my colleague Daphne Weisham and colleagues. My name is Phoebe Barnard. I'll be your host for today. I'm a global change and ecosystem scientist, as well as a national development public policy strategist, a national development policy strategist, a film co-producer in my after hours, but my day job is that I am CEO of the Stable Planet Alliance, a new global coalition of dynamic and well-respected organizations working to decrease the human planetary impact of our species. Also just relevant to this, perhaps, I co-authored the World Scientists' Warning of a Climate Emergency and was lead author of the World Scientists' Warnings into Action framework, local to global. To briefly introduce my co-panelists here, John Bowie, filmmaker behind Transmedia Vision, a small company now based in the USA working on big issues for society. To my left, Daphne Weisham, CEO of the nonprofit Methane Action and longtime public policy strategist in the climate and environmental damage space. Next to her, Dr. Joshina Nagia, marine social ecologist from Stanford University, an expert on ocean and coastal communities and social justice. And finally, to her left, Peter Fikowski, physicist, entrepreneur, activist, philanthropist, and literally author of the book on climate restoration in 2022. So before getting into the substance of today's press conference, I'd like to mention several important key organizations which facilitated this. Scientists Warning Europe, on whose board I sit, which allocated this press conference slot, the International Society for Ecological Economics, Sustainable Population Australia, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and the Peter and Sharon Fikowski Trust. So, I hope you've settled down in your seats. Welcome again. Climate restoration. It's the biggest thing that we've just not been talking about. And fundamentally, it's one of the most important things that we can be discussing here at COP27. It's essential for the future of our climate, our planet, and our civilization. Now, if I can tell you a personal story shortly, as an ecosystem scientist working on climate and biodiversity in Southern Africa and globally for 3.5 decades, I honestly did not want to confront the issue, the reality of a world where ecosystems could increasingly no longer support humanity and other species. But after my work on the board of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment about 15 years ago, I had to confront in detail the capacity of the world's ecosystems to support not only human economies, but human health and well-being. And that gave me a real kick in the guts on this issue, which has led to my involvement today. Our ecosystems and our carbon sinks are fast declining. They are fast being destroyed, as well as at the time that we are adding roughly 80 million net new mouths to feed on the planet every year. We are creating a perfect storm. for the planet, at the same time that those babies born need to have a decent quality of life. We emphasize, and I want to be super clear to everyone in this room, that climate restoration, an important concept, must never be seen to give a free pass, a get-out-of-jail pass, to the fossil fuel industry, to the global economy, to any of us personally in the affluent world, and I think most of us flew here. It must happen side by side with dramatic drawdown of energy use, with stringent and accelerated widespread ecosystem restoration and the protection of carbon-rich ecosystems. So this is why John Bowie and I made this film, the extended trailer for which we will show shortly. But meanwhile, I'd like to hand over to John Bowie to introduce himself and then the trailer. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks for the introduction. About 40 years ago, I was hired to make a series of cheesy horror movies, which I did for a few years and then went on to produce live concerts, talk shows, and documentaries on issues around, social issues around gender identity, addiction and homelessness. And here I am today, about 40 years later, and I'm actually in a horror movie about a planet that's addicted to fossil fuels with an ever-growing homeless population due to climate impacts, and the people impacted are the people least responsible for the things that are happening to them. But the script to the film that we're making isn't finished yet, and we're really working on having a happy ending to it. And I'm not naive, but I do think that that is possible. I read a book that Peter Fikowski wrote on climate restoration, and that really inspired me and got me thinking. And I didn't agree with every detail on it, but it inspired me enough to start learning about a subject I didn't know that much about. And that's what this film is about in many ways. It's looking at activism, grassroots organizations that are springing up that really feel that they deserve a place at the table when it comes to defining the future. And at the moment, we all seem to be calling the fire brigade, and the fire brigade come along to put out the fire on your house, but they just stop and negotiate first before they actually turn the water on to do it. Anyway, this film is a positive look at the possibilities of restoration, and not in and of itself, but in terms of all the other elements that are still needed in terms of reduction, in terms of eco-restoration, adaptation, and reduction. We're still filming. We're going to be going over to Pakistan, Nigeria, other locations where grassroots organizations are getting together and getting together to influence and inform local policy. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Here's the trailer. It's about 8 minutes, and it's a kind of a little bit of a mini movie, because we didn't want to make a trailer that's just to sell the movie. We wanted to do something that kind of informs.
The only way to predict our future on this planet, our only planet, is to create it. But to avoid repeating the actions that got us to this point, we have to understand and acknowledge our past. The Paris Accord and IRA in the US, although important steps, fall far short of addressing the catastrophe unfolding. It's clear that events are overtaking us. Achieving net zero is an essential step, but won't save us from the ever-growing climate catastrophes.
The elephant in the room is the carbon dioxide that we already have in the atmosphere. All these extreme weather events, this is all due to the CO2 in the atmosphere that we already have.
We are currently at well over 500 parts per million if we count in not just carbon dioxide, 420, but also methane. The pre-industrial level was 270 parts per million.
Well, achieving net zero emissions for all greenhouse gases by 2050 would be marvelous. I don't think it's enough.
We need to reduce our emissions by 50% by 2030. That's only 8 years away. That's 8 harvests. That is students who are currently starting middle school. They're going to be going to college.
One of the things that drives me to do this work is seeing some of the hopelessness that the youth have shown. They're really incredulous that we haven't done more already and that we've let it get to this point, that we do it under the auspices of preserving the economy rather than realizing that the planet that we live on is the only way we're all going to survive.
So where do you go when you learn that the strategy you've been supporting all this time isn't going to save us?
One is that we all want to restore the climate. The best part is that we have the technology to do it. We have the technology, the finance, and now what we need is to change our thinking so we're actually pursuing it.
The eco-anxiety that people feel is very widespread, and what alleviates that better than anything is taking action.
It was like a nickel dropped, and I got that we can do it. It's like the moonshot.
The facts of the matter are that we have never made the national decisions or marshaled the national resources required for such leadership. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
This is our moonshot moment, deciding that we are going to return our climate to a sustainable pre-industrial level, good enough for our children, the generations that follow, and all life on Earth.
Climate restoration means getting the climate back to levels that humans have actually survived long term.
Climate restoration makes a whole lot of sense, first of all, because it's win-win, healthier ecosystems, a healthier environment, a better planet is obviously better for us.
Many of the solutions for restoration, help us on the way to stabilizing and slowing down the feedbacks and avoiding the tipping points today.
I think what I've seen, especially as a person of color, is well-meaning people come in with, we have all of the answers. Instead of really leaning into the work and saying, I need to first understand the problem I'm trying to solve, which is empathizing, meaningful consultation, gathering those facts, and then not assume that I know the answer and allow the problem to be defined by the community inhabitants, and then to have a collaborative partnership on how we reach the solutions.
Currently, there are 4 areas being developed that seem to hold the most promise for permanent, scalable removal of carbon. We think of carbon as a problem, but it's also an essential element of our planet, with around 50 million gigatons being held in the form of limestone. Limestone is Earth's stable carbon warehouse. A company in California has developed a method of permanently sequestering CO2 at ambient temperatures and converting it into a building material.
The state of the climate is very concerning. It's hard to see, it's hard to be here in the Caribbean, but it feels really good to be working on something that we believe is truly scalable and can really move the needle in terms of climate and carbon sequestration.
Sargassum and kelp, both effective carbon sinks, are being harvested and converted into materials that replace fossil fuel products. Research is also being done on baling the seaweeds and depositing them in deep, sparsely inhabited ocean areas.
Alongside a need to understand, well, how can we figure out how to cut our carbon emissions, comes big questions about, well, what is the role of some of our best engineers in the marine environment, which those engineers are things like kelp, things like oysters, things that have been engineered for thousands of years to thrive in these places and to provide core functions that really help our whole marine ecosystem thrive.
Here we are, we're in a tsunami zone. We are routinely preparing for a worst-case disaster scenario here in Port Townsend. We have no preparation for a worst-case scenario of a methane burst.
Beneath me and under the ground, there are massive blocks of ice. We call them ice wedges. And those blocks are melting. And because of that melt, this puddle is going to become a pond that is really the birth of a new thermokarst lake. And this environment can produce a lot of methane gas.
Right now we're in a methane emergency. And like CO2, reduction is not nearly enough. Around a third of climate warming is due to methane, causing methane sinks to become methane sources, like the vast thawing permafrost of the far north. Methane removal is essential if we are to reduce and stabilize global temperatures.
Right now, the global warming due to methane is 0.5 degrees Celsius, and the carbon dioxide is only about 0.8. So methane is really the second most important greenhouse gas, and acting on it, we can reduce temperatures.
Ocean iron fertilization mimics how iron-rich dust is periodically and locally deposited into the Atlantic from the Sahara Desert, providing algae with the iron they need to grow and sequester carbon. The resulting blooms provide a pulse of nutrients that support food webs that revive fisheries. So here we are, out of road and out of time, but not out of ideas or science or resources to restore a world that has been so badly damaged by our inventiveness and insatiable appetite for more. This really is our moonshot moment, where we accept nothing less than what our children and the planet deserve, a way back to our future.
Thank you, Kareem, and all of the guys at the back. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I really want to keep a little time for question and answers, but I'd like to hand over to Daphne Weisham. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phoebe and John. My name is Daphne Weisham, and I'm the CEO of Methane Action. As that excellent trailer Back to Our Future stated, we are in fact in a methane emergency. The good news is that we at Methane Action are working to solve the methane emergency and avoid a rise in temperatures of an average of 0.6 degrees Celsius or over 1 degree Fahrenheit by 2050 globally, but we have to act fast. Our mission at Methane Action is to restore atmospheric methane levels from their record levels today of over 1,900 ppb to pre-industrial levels of 700 ppb as quickly as possible. The brilliant scientists we're working with from Stanford, Cambridge, and elsewhere believe we can do this as step one in restoring the climate. Now, as that graph that John showed, obviously we know CO2 levels are rising very rapidly, but it turns out methane levels in the atmosphere are not only at record levels, but they're rising over two times faster than CO2. Methane is over 80 times more powerful than CO2 over a 20-year time span and responsible for 2/3 of the warming of carbon dioxide. Now, the Global Methane Pledge was largely targeted at the 60% of methane levels that are in the atmosphere from anthropogenic or man-made sources. But what few understood until very recently is that the 40% of all methane emissions that comes from natural sources, such as melting permafrost and expanding swamps in tropical countries, these sources of methane appear to be rising as well. As Stanford professor Rob Jackson, who chairs the Global Carbon Project and serves on our board, was quoted in the Washington Post recently stating regarding the unprecedented rise in atmospheric methane, quote, The isotope data suggest it's biological rather than fossil methane from gas leaks. It could be from agriculture. It could even be the start of a dangerous warming-induced acceleration in methane emissions from wetlands and other natural systems we've been worrying about for decades. Aside from the handful of scientists we are working with, most doing the research with little to no funding from the government, there is no plan right now to deal with what could be a feedback loop of methane from quote-unquote natural sources, which seem to be rising due to global warming. So first, let me define what I mean by methane removal. Unlike carbon dioxide removal, we do not remove it and store it somewhere. What we mean by methane removal is accelerating the oxidation of methane, transforming it into carbon dioxide and water vapor, as nature does, and doing so in scientifically and environmentally sound, safe, and sustainable ways. In order to reduce methane's impact as a warming agent, types of methane removal, you can go to our website, methaneaction.org. Under technical, you can see the different types of methane removal that our scientists have reviewed and consider viable. Now, of course, the Global Methane Pledge is a very important first start. However, it only targets 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. UNEP and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition say we need to get to 45% below 2030 below 2020 levels by 2030 in order to avoid exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris target. Our scientists tell us that the combination of robust methane mitigation plus atmospheric methane removal has the potential to avoid 0.6 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures by 2050 and to restore atmospheric methane to pre-industrial levels, also by 2050. In order to address what may be the beginning of a methane feedback loop, methane removal will be essential. Now, in my last few seconds, I do want to say that at Methane Action, we know this technology demands that it be handled with utmost care, with good governance, transparency, and accountability. We need your support. If you're a scientist, please endorse our expert statement on our website, methaneaction.org. If you're a civil society org, please sign on to our CSO statement, also at methaneaction.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daphne. I'd like to turn over to Dr. Joshina Nagia with Stanford University. Thanks, Joshi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joshina. I'm a marine social ecologist from Mauritius, a small island nation in the Indian Ocean. As an island nation, we are absolutely feeling the impacts of climate change compounded by other environmental stresses. I am currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Stanford Center for Ocean Solutions, working on ocean innovations for small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. Today, we stand at a point in time where we need to amplify our climate restoration strategies. However, we need to ensure that we have equity at the center of our actions. There's no moving forward without social and environmental justice. Whenever we think about climate restoration, it is very important to keep people and nature in mind. Both are impacted heavily by climate, but people and nature can help amplify solutions. So engaging all concerned stakeholders in our climate restoration strategies, for example, even understanding how our ecosystems were prior to these stresses, is paramount for their long-term success. Whether we are thinking about nature-based solutions like blue carbon or tech and non-tech innovation, equity needs to be a key concern. Who are impacted, who are benefiting from the solutions, how are challenges being met, and how are solutions being shared. Climate restoration should be a moonshot moment for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshi. Did you have a question? Oh, yes, thank you. All right, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Peter Fikowski now.
Thank you. As the author of the book on climate restoration, the question comes up, why do we need moonshot to do this and to rewrite our future. And when I was a young kid, when I was 6, President Kennedy announced the moonshot, and it was amazing, even for a 6-year-old, to imagine that. And it aligned our whole country, it aligned the whole world on a very specific goal. And climate restoration, the climate is a need. We all want a climate that humanity has survived long term and that our children will survive in. It goes without saying, and that's why people haven't said it. But it's now at stake, and climate restoration is that moonshot. Why haven't we done it? Is an unsuccessful project has an unclear goal. And so climate restoration is all about specifically getting CO2 below levels that humans have survived, below 300 parts per million, getting methane back to pre-industrial 0.7 parts per million, and just those two, and doing it while we still can by 2050. So it's very similar to President Kennedy's moonshot. And then the question is, who's going to do it? And as Daphne pointed out, there needs to be governance. And so just in the last 6 months, we've also organized the Climate Restoration Safety and Governance Board. And it's both analyzing the projects to ensure that they're safe and also to ensure that they're effective, that they will result in restoring a climate that humans have survived and will again survive.
Thank you very much, Peter. I hope that we have helped assure you that although there is a great deal of work still to be done to finalize some of the technologies, to scale them up, to prove viability, that we need a global focus, that there is like a three-legged pot, a poiky pot if you live in Africa, of climate restoration, climate adaptation, climate mitigation. We need all three to be well-funded with good governance, justice at their core, if humanity is to get through these critical crossroads. As I often say, the world does not have to be this way, it does not have to end this way. We can change it, and we are changing it. I hope you will join us. Now, this is a big discussion. If there is an urgent question in the last minute or two, I'd like you to feel free to speak up. Otherwise, we can speak outside while the next session goes ahead. So please, if you'd like to have the microphone, raise your hand high. And if you haven't had a flyer, please come and get one after the session. Thank you.